Good morning, everyone. My name is Shri, and I will be your moderator this evening. And on behalf of Beroe, I would like to welcome you all to our fourth webinar of this season. And our topic for today is enabling green computing through a tool called EPEAT. So before we go ahead into the topic, I just have some general set of instructions as always. If you want to post a question, you will see that on your right-hand panel, a questions tab. It's indicated in the red box here. Request you to type your questions and then hit the send button on the lower right corner. And as and when the presentation progresses, I will note down the high-frequency questions and pose it to the presenter at the end of her presentation. If you're having any connection issues, like if you have a disconnect, please go back to your inbox from the email, go to webinar, and click on the link provided in that once again. If there are further problems, request you to please email Puneet at puneet.ramal@beroe-inc.com. This email is also disclosed in the message that was sent to you. So, let me quickly go ahead and introduce our speakers for today. I want to start out by introducing our presenter, Rakshana. She is a senior research analyst at Beroe specializing in IT procurement, and to this day she has authored over 30 market intelligence reports. In the categories that she's working on include enterprise hardware, software, and all software-related services. I'm your moderator. I don't have to introduce myself. Please excuse my voice for today. I'm having a little bit of cold. We also have an expert in today's call, Sarah O'Brien, joining us from the United States. Thank you so much for being here, Sarah. A quick introduction about Sarah. She is an expert in the use of green purchasing, quote-unquote, initiatives to reduce environmental impact. She's a key purchaser member of the stakeholder process that created EPEAT tool to address lifecycle environmental impacts of ICT. So the nonprofit Green Electronics Council is what handles all this, and as a director of stakeholder engagement, Sarah works with all users of the systems to ensure they can effectively leverage EPEAT to reduce the environmental impact on their electronics purchasing or production. So thanks again, Sarah. Without further ado, let me just pass it on to my analyst, Rakshana, who will start off with an introduction of this tool. Go ahead, Rakshana.
Thank you, Shriram. Hello, and thank you all for being a part of the webinar. And it's a great pleasure to have Sarah O'Brien from Green Electronics Council today. Thank you for joining us, Sarah.
Today, you're welcome. It's a pleasure.
Thank you, Sarah. Today, I'm going to speak about a very compelling topic on EPEAT, which is short for the Electronic Procurement Environmental Assessment Tool, and how this plays a significant role in an enterprise's green IT procurement strategy. Now, let me take a moment and explain more about EPEAT. So, EPEAT is an environmental rating program which is currently managed by the Green Electronics Council, and it evaluates and rates the IT hardware products based on their conformance to several environmental attributes. So, Sarah, I believe that EPEAT is a truly revolutionary idea in the green IT space. So, what is the main purpose for Green Electronics Council to come up with this concept of EPEAT?
Thanks, Rakshana. You know, the main reason for coming up with EPEAT was to simplify the integration of environmental concerns, environmental performance attributes into the procurement process. It was something that both purchasers and suppliers, vendors were struggling with, trying to define what attributes made a product greener. And so the US EPA convened a stakeholder process to try and address this issue. The Green Electronics Council's mission is to drive environmental improvement through the electronics sector through the use of market mechanisms like EPEAT. So we are a nonprofit with that environmental mission, but very much focused on integrating environmental performance into marketplace transactions.
Mm-hmm. So what I believe it does is that it ultimately provides a purely voluntary purchasing option for enterprise buyers and thereby enables them to streamline, compare, and select environmentally preferable products. Now, when I spoke of the topic, I mentioned the term compelling because when I looked at the tremendous growth of EPEAT over the past couple of years, and when I looked at the future prospects as well, I believe that it truly has the potential to enhance an enterprise's green IT strategy. Alright, now let me quickly take you all through the agenda for the webinar. So I'm going to start off with a brief introduction about green IT and the specific role that EPEAT plays in the green IT strategy. Further on, I'm going to delve into my observation on the rapid growth of EPEAT as a procurement enabler and the distinctive benefits for enterprises. And moving on, I'm going to explain the way forward for enterprises and focus upon how EPEAT can be incorporated in the procurement cycle. And finally, I'm going to present some interesting case studies of Fortune 500 companies who have implemented EPEAT to achieve their green IT objectives. Now, before I proceed with the webinar, I'd just like to mention that for the sake of simplicity, throughout the webinar, Sarah and I would be referring to the Electronic Procurement Environmental Assessment Tool as EPEAT. Alright, now let me proceed to the webinar. Now, in the current business environment, what I have been constantly observing is that green IT is one of the top 3 concerns for category managers. So setting up a robust green IT strategy, setting the policies, practices, and to measure the green IT performance are some of the important challenges that is faced by them. But what is this green IT all about? If I should put it in very simple terms, green IT is the effective use of computer resources in an organization in such a way that they attain environmental sustainability. But the question really is, why should it actually matter to enterprises? What is the need to adopt these green IT techniques? Now, the major cause for this is due to numerous regulations governing this space. And to name a few, the Carbon Trust Management Program, the Carbon Reduction Commitment, the Registration, Evaluation, Authorization and Restriction of Chemicals, so on and so forth. Now, while generally companies are forced to adhere to these environmental regulations owing to any legal liabilities that would arise in the case of a regulation breach, I believe that the larger concern for enterprises is perhaps on the negative impact on the company's brand image. And this has made sustainability more of a must-have rather than a nice-to-have for enterprises. So as a result of the stringent regulatory nature, what I've noticed is that most often enterprises are required to constantly monitor 3 key parameters, which I would say are the 3 E's. Now let me take it one by one. So the first E is electronic waste reduction, and this deals with equipment disposal and waste management. Now, based on my interactions with enterprise buyers, if I should give an importance rating for each of these 3 E's, purely based on the complexity of management, I would give the topmost priority for electronic waste reduction. Now, the second E deals with energy efficient levels, and this is related to optimizing power efficiency, power utilization, and heat dissipation. Now, this is specifically a growing problem in data centers, and a priority level for energy efficient levels would be a little lower than electronic waste reduction. Nonetheless, it is still in the high category for enterprises. Now, the third E is ecological carbon footprint reduction, and this pertains to the emission of CO2 gases during the usage phase of these IT hardware products, and this comes as the third priority for enterprises today. Now, in order to manage these 3 E's, category managers have considered several operational green IT practices ranging from small initiatives such as changing the cooling mechanism or optimizing the product recycling, all the way up to even large-scale techniques such as virtualization. But in my opinion, the key to handle these 3 E's is to change the focus from these operational practices to the root of the problem, which is procurement. So the question really is, how efficient are procurement practices aligned to address these 3 E's? Now, this is exactly where EPEAT will feature. So I would say that the key to attain environmental sustainability is through the purchase of environmentally sustainable products, and this is precisely where EPEAT will feature. So as I had mentioned earlier, EPEAT is a rating system which evaluates and rates IT hardware products based on several environmental attributes. Now, in the long run, these EPEAT parameters also addresses the 3 E's that I spoke about. How exactly, I'll be discussing in just a short while, but let me focus more on EPEAT. So what EPEAT does is that it provides a comprehensive rating system which enables enterprise buyers to have better visibility over the environmental performance of the product and thereby enables them to make an informed purchase decision. Alright, now let's look at what goes into an EPEAT rating. So for a product to be rated as EPEAT, it is evaluated across 8 different product categories ranging from material selection, reduction of environmentally sensitive materials, all the way up to even packaging and corporate performance. So Sarah, what I can see is that this is a very comprehensive rating system since it not only takes into consideration the product design aspects but also the design for end of life and even product life longevity. So what is the main premise in considering these performance categories, Sarah?
Well, I think there are a couple of things, Rakshana, that are important to understand here. And one is the motivation for the design of the system, which really touches on 3 things. One is the effort to address all the environmental impacts of the products in question. The other is to enable wide and informed purchaser selection. And the third is to drive competition among the brand owners, among the manufacturers who participate in the system. So as you say, the system touches on all of these aspects of the life cycle, including those that are inherent in the product, things like recycled resin content or reduction of toxics in particular aspects of the product, right through service and use aspects like energy efficiency, which obviously is critical to enterprise performance, right through to end-of-life management, which is required for any product that is registered in the system. So the way that the stakeholders designed the system to meet these multiple goals is that products are rated. First of all, it is a product rating system. It is focused on the product in the registry and what that product can do for the purchaser's organization to reduce environmental impact. Secondly, the products are rated based on a combination of required criteria, which are leading-edge performance criteria that are required for entry-level registration of any product, combined with optional criteria. And as you see here, the 23 mandatory and 28 optional are the numbers that apply to the PC and display standard. We also cover other categories, but each category so far has about 50 to 55 criteria, about half of which are required and half of which are optional. Now, the reason I say that this structure drives all of the interests that the stakeholders wanted to meet is that we have a very visible way of ranking products against each other based on how they meet environmental criteria. And that is, there is a system of bronze, silver, and gold ratings that are based on the number or percentage of optional criteria that are met by each product. So to enter the system at the bronze level, a product simply has to meet the required criteria. Often bronze level products meet a few more criteria above that, but the 23 required is all that is necessary to attain the bronze registration. Then for silver registration, the product has to meet at least 50% of the optional criteria. Again, it may meet higher, it may meet 60 or so, but the 50% requirement triggers that silver rating. And finally, for a gold rating, a product has to meet 75% or higher of the optional criteria. So that's getting to a very high level of performance across all of these different attribute categories. What this does, just quickly, is it enables purchasers to compare products side by side and to look at manufacturers' ability to attain these more challenging, more complex optional criteria, and to factor that into their decision making.
Exactly. So it provides the baseline rating for buyers to benchmark and evaluate the vendors. Right? So what I have also observed is that for a product to even be qualified for an EPEAT rating, it has to meet 100% of the mandatory criteria. So the variance is only there in the optional criteria with 75, 50 and 0 for gold, silver and bronze. So it's quite obvious that the best practice is to go for an EPEAT gold certified product. But I would say that enterprises should take it one step further and target to procure gold certified products which meets more than 75% of the optional criteria, which is preferably around 90%. And this is quite a competitive market strategy that is adopted by vendors today. For example, HP's products are designed and engineered in such a way that they meet 90 to 95% of EPEAT's optional gold criteria. But having said that, there are certain constraints in adopting EPEAT gold certified products owing to either product unavailability and limitation in product selection. So we'll elaborate more on it in the implementation section. So here I would say that EPEAT provides the baseline rating to benchmark and select sustainable products, as Sarah had rightly pointed out. Alright, so we looked at what goes into an EPEAT rating. Now let me proceed to explain why procurement cannot afford to ignore EPEAT. So I have been tracking the growth of EPEAT for quite a while now, and I've witnessed several interesting developments. So I took into consideration the number of devices versus the number of registered manufacturers across the various time periods. So what I observed was that at the outset, EPEAT covered only desktops, laptops and monitors. But after the immense response that it garnered among government entities, educational institutions and few enterprise purchasers, EPEAT registry immediately started working on plans to expand to several other IT hardware categories. But what caught my attention this year was the expansion of EPEAT into the imaging equipment segment, which comprises of printers, scanners, copiers and multifunction devices. And ever since then, I have seen top players in the market such as Ricoh, Canon and Xerox rigorously trying to alter their manufacturing capabilities to meet these EPEAT requirements and to remain competitive in the market as well. So as of now, the number of devices has risen to 3,200 and the number of registered manufacturers stands at 50. Now moving forward, EPEAT further has plans to broaden its purview to expand to smartphone segment and in 2015 to the server segment as well. So what I believe is that with established norms for smartphone segments in place, EPEAT will further expand to cover the variant of the smartphone segment, which is tablets, by 2016 and further go on to expand to even network equipment possibly by the end of 2016. So I believe that by 2016, EPEAT will target to become the holistic IT hardware procurement standard for all IT hardware requirements. And trust me, this will not just impact the buyer segment, but it will also have a profound impact on the manufacturers as well. So we already saw that with reference to Ricoh, Canon and Xerox in the imaging equipment segment. Now let me draw another parallel reference here. So in 2012, Apple made a move to remove its Mac products from the EPEAT registry. But this immediately evoked a growing concern amongst governments, enterprise purchasers and environmentalists. And this proved to be a major setback for Apple's credibility as a sustainable supplier, and it immediately sought to alter its manufacturing capabilities to rejoin EPEAT's registry in just a month's time. Now this goes to show the extent of EPEAT impact on the global supply base. And this impact will be quite significant by 2016, where EPEAT will become the single comprehensive environmental rating system for all your IT hardware requirements. Now, in the IT hardware segment, product shipment is the definitive indicator of a market success or market failure. So I track the shipments of EPEAT products for 3 different categories, such as desktops, laptops, and standalone displays or the monitors since 2010. So what I observed was that EPEAT shipments grew at nearly 25 to 30% over this entire duration. And there's another interesting thing to note about here. So in 2011, EPEAT registered products comprised of around 25% of the global PC shipments. But looking at the swift growth of EPEAT, I believe that this might well go on to expand to nearly 50 to 55% of the global PC shipments by just 2014. And this is essentially doubling in market size. So far we looked at the growth of EPEAT from the perspective of product category and shipments. But perhaps the most impressive part is yet to come, and that is on the geographical expansion. So initially, EPEAT originated in US and expansion started to Canada in 2007. But what truly made me sit up and take notice of this phenomenon was the significant geographical expansion to cover nearly 41 countries by just 2011. And EPEAT further has plans to expand to India by 2014 and has plans for few other regions as well. So let us ask Sarah. So Sarah, EPEAT's geographical expansion has been very, very significant in the past couple of years. So how has Green Electronics planned EPEAT's growth in the next few years?
It's true, Rakshana. The growth geographically, the demand for use of EPEAT has been surprising and very gratifying to all the stakeholders who are involved in the hard work of developing and managing EPEAT. We actually are a country-specific registration system, as we'll talk about in a little more detail later. But because we register products including services, there is a need for local verification effort, local infrastructure. And so our growth is something that we try to manage to make sure that although we see demand all over the world and we get calls and emails from folks in all sorts of non-covered territories, our advisory council plans rollouts on a very manageable and verifiable basis. So as you mentioned, we are expanding currently. Actually just yesterday we had a final vote from our advisory council endorsing our expansion into the Indian market, where I have just been exploring and finding a great deal of positive feedback. And we've also had inquiries from Turkey, from Tunisia, and a number of Latin American countries as well. So as I say, we try to manage this growth because it's possible that we would be in demand in every country in the world but not able to really support the credibility and solidity of the system if we grow too fast. So I believe we'll roll out probably 1 to 2 countries a year over the next few years, obviously based on where the demand is greatest, where the market is growing, and where EPEAT can have the highest environmental improvement impact.
It's quite impressive, Sarah. Definitely on track to become the global standard, I believe. Thank you, Sarah. So looking at the adoption by region, the major adopter is US with an adoption rate of more than 50%. And there's a very interesting reason behind this. So this is predominantly attributed to US governmental schemes which mandates that all federal agencies should procure 95% of their IT hardware based on EPEAT requirements. And this goes to show the importance given to EPEAT purchasing in the federal sector. Now, the second major adopter of EPEAT products is Western Europe, and this is due to several regulations in the European Union such as the REACH program, the restriction on hazardous substances, or the EU Code of Conduct on Data Centers, to name a few. Now, moving forward, Eastern Europe and China are set to be the next big adopters of EPEAT in the forthcoming years.
Yeah, Rakshana, I think one thing I'd like to add, in the previous slide, you talked about unit shipments being a very good indicator of adoption of EPEAT, right?
Yeah.
And this slide is interesting because it's going to expand into the Asian markets. And we all know that India and China, for example, account for one of the largest market for smartphones.
Exactly.
So in the
Yes.
previous slide, you said, growth can be over 50%. And that's just monitors and laptops. If we take the millions of smartphones that are being sold, what is your estimate of the growth of EPEAT adoption? Any guesses at this point? I know we are going ahead here, but I'm sure that our, audience would like to hear that.
Thank you, Shriram. That's a very interesting question. So, I guess I took into consideration only 3 categories of desktops, laptops, and monitors. But if you consider the smartphone segment, where EPEAT is also planning to expand in the forthcoming years, I believe that the contribution to the global PC shipments will well go on to reach nearly 75%, easily 75%.
Yes, and an interesting factor there is that the world's leading smartphone producers, Apple, Samsung, LG, Lenovo, and others, are already involved in the system. So it's very likely that they will simply, take on board this next product category. So we do expect very rapid growth when that standard is in place.
Definitely a lot of growth expected in the smartphone segment as well.
All right, go ahead. Thanks.
Right. Thank you. Yeah. So overall, looking at EPEAT's growth from the perspective of product category, shipments, and geography, I believe that EPEAT will be the global one-stop shop for all IT hardware procurement requirements by 2016.
Mm-hmm. I think the interesting thing too, Rakshana, to notice is that this growth was somewhat unplanned. We've now managed it over the past 7 years and have a good handle on how it's moving forward. But really what it attests to is the usefulness of EPEAT for all parties in the market. The fact that it works well for manufacturers, it works well for purchasers, has caused this very rapid growth and expansion, which is obviously very meaningful in terms of environmental impact reduction as well.
Exactly. So we looked at growth of EPEAT from 3 different perspectives, and growth has been very impressive. So it's a very positive change and a very good prospect for EPEAT's growth. Right? So far we looked at EPEAT's growth from different perspectives, but what is in it for enterprises? What is the so what element for enterprises today? So this is precisely what we are going to look into. So there are a lot of benefits for EPEAT. So let me take it one by one. So the first important benefit is on the organizational front. So the use of EPEAT registered products has significant impacts on the increased environmental value and environmental benefits for the company. So I analyzed the environmental performance of an EPEAT registered product versus a non-EPEAT registered product by considering several factors across the various phases in the product life cycle, such as the purchase phase, the usage phase, and the end of life cycle phase. So some of the factors that I considered were lead reduction, mercury and cadmium reduction, power usage reduction, increase in product life, equipment reusability, and recyclability. So what I observed was that across all these parameters, on an average, an EPEAT registered product was found to have nearly 60 to 65% improvement in the environmental performance when you compare that with a non-EPEAT registered product. And when I had a discussion with Sarah a few days back about the environmental benefits of going for an EPEAT product, she shared a very interesting business case scenario, and it was a clear impact of the profound impact of EPEAT on the environmental benefits. So Sarah, would you like to brief upon some of the major observations in your business case scenario? Sarah, are you there?
Sarah, I think you're on mute. You might want to unmute.
I am on mute. There we go. This is looking at 1,000 CPUs purchased, CPUs and monitors purchased, used, and recycled. We wanted to get some kind of unit so that people could understand their own procurement based on this average scenario. You may be purchasing 100 computers, you may be purchasing 10,000 or 100,000. This gives just a baseline through which you can estimate the benefits to your organization. So as we look at the environmental benefits, we see that there are significant reductions in hazardous waste, 75 tons of hazardous waste, and that is through the production phase as well as end of life. There's a significant reduction in toxic materials, which is primarily obviously in the production phase, but also is very important to reducing harm at end of life in recycling operations. Reductions in solid waste, again, these are throughout the life cycle of the product, particularly obviously the manufacturing and disposal phases. Energy use reduction obviously is the significant reduction in your use phase impact, and that is almost 6,000 megawatt hours over the life of these 1,000 silver rated products. Very, very significant energy use reduction, and obviously cost reduction associated with that. And finally, if you are involved in a carbon reporting scheme or doing greenhouse gas assessment and reduction within your organization, the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions is over 1,000 metric tons of carbon equivalent, which means that per unit you're getting almost a metric ton of carbon equivalent reduction in your organization's impact. So these types of reductions are very important to understand, particularly if you are in the IT procurement sector and trying to communicate to your sustainability officer or to your manager why this is important. These kinds of very clear reductions, very clear improvements in environmental performance that can be reported up the chain as part of your CSR efforts are very significant.
Precisely, Sarah. We were in fact including environmental brand recognition as one of the most significant benefits, and we'll be discussing in just a short while. It's great that you had mentioned it as well. So you had mentioned about the environmental benefits, but there's another interesting thing that is to be noted here. These environmental benefits ultimately serves to address the 3 E's that I spoke about earlier, which is electronic waste reduction, energy efficient levels, and ecological carbon footprint reduction. So this goes to show that in the long run, EPEAT registered products will enable the enterprise to attain the objectives of environmental sustainability by directly addressing these 3 E's. And this is the most important benefit of going for an EPEAT product. So the second major benefit is the reduction in complexity. So in monitoring an enterprise's green IT performance, what happens very often is that category managers are required to constantly monitor several parameters such as the power usage reduction, cooling methods, monitoring greenhouse gas emissions, or periodic supplier auditing, and recyclable parts management. But this entire process is very cumbersome and time consuming. So the use of EPEAT registered product eliminates all these processes because being a standardized green procurement method, it automatically addresses these parameters during the rating phase, and it serves to keep these indicators under the threshold during the usage phase of the product. So it enables the category managers to reduce additional complexity and hassles in having to create individual parameters and to monitor the green performance of the company. And this is another important benefit of EPEAT. So we looked at the benefits of EPEAT from the environmental perspective and on the operational complexity. But if cost is the most important aspect, well, that's precisely what we are going to look into. And this brings us to the impact on cost components. So the direct and the most immediate benefit of going for an EPEAT product is on the usage cost. So by addressing the parameters of power utilization, energy efficiency, and cooling requirements, EPEAT reduces the overall usage cost for a product. And this is a very significant impact because it serves to impact the total cost of ownership for any IT hardware product. Usage cost is a major contributor for the TCO for any IT hardware product, and let me take up a case scenario for the same. So in a typical PC life cycle, support costs contribute to nearly 35 to 40% of the overall TCO of a company if you probably look at a duration of 5 years. So the use of EPEAT products by addressing the area of usage cost reduces it by nearly 10 to 15%, thereby ultimately impacting the TCO. Now the second cost component that is impacted is the end of life cycle cost. And this is due to the inherent recyclability and reusability in an EPEAT product, and this is quite evident from a recyclability of nearly 85 to 90% in any EPEAT product. Now in the long run, these reusable and recyclable capabilities also inadvertently impact another important cost component, and that is the purchase cost. So let me explain why. So by purchase cost, I'm not referring to a cost comparison between an EPEAT certified product versus a non-EPEAT certified product. What I mean by purchase cost is that the usage of EPEAT registered products due to the inherent capabilities of recyclability and reusability helps the enterprise to elongate the refresh cycle by nearly 1 to 2 years. So this is the current global focus in IT hardware sourcing as well, and EPEAT precisely enables the enterprise to achieve this. So if you look at the average refresh cycle, the current IT hardware industry average for refresh cycle is a minimum of 3 years to a maximum of 5 years. So use of EPEAT products will elongate the duration to an average of nearly 5 to 7 years. And this results in reduction in multiple sourcing cycles, thereby ultimately impacting the capital cost. So Sarah, we know for a fact that EPEAT would have a significant impact on the usage cost and on the end of life cycle cost. But the impact on refresh cycle and thereby on the purchase cost is perhaps the most significant one. So what are some of the important sourcing scenarios that you had witnessed where EPEAT products acted as an enabler for this refresh cycle optimization?
Yeah, this is a very critical area, as you mentioned, and one that EPEAT stakeholders really wanted to address quite effectively in the standard. So as we always say in purchasing, what goes out the door at the end of life is largely determined by what comes in the door when you purchase. So looking at the huge problems of electronic waste, of informal and unsafe recycling initiatives, and at the complexity of products and the ways that that created barriers to effective reuse, refurbishment, and recycling, the EPEAT stakeholders integrated over, I think, 11 criteria that have to do with product longevity, including extended life cycle criteria, extended availability of spare parts, modular design for ease of upgrades, a number of criteria that really enable an organization to go for best practice in extending life cycle. For example, we always in the green IT sphere talk about redeploying equipment within the organization as the first step, then refurbishment and perhaps reuse again within the organization or resale. A number of steps to extend that product's useful life, whether inside or outside of the organization, before it's discarded, even if that is to a recycling system. So the refresh cycle, when EPEAT came on the scene, was approximately 3 years for the average organization, whether public or private purchaser. And now we've seen, for example, the U.S. federal government, which purchases about 10% of the EPEAT products sold in the U.S., has extended that life cycle to around 6 years. And so when you think about the cost reduction in not purchasing every 3 years and instead perhaps putting some refurbishment or upgrade funds towards improving performance, but keeping those products in use within the organization, that's a very, very significant saving.
Exactly. So I'd say that refresh cycle is more of the surprise element here in going for an EPEAT product. Right?
So Rakshana or Sarah, either one or both can answer this. I think in this slide there's a lot of technicalities when you're trying to use EPEAT, and one thing we know from our experience being a procurement organization, category managers are very short of time. So as much as they'd like to use this tool and implement it, can they get help from the Green Council, which will make it a little bit easier for them? Or do they have to go through a college course, you know? That's
You know, that's a great remark and great question. And I think the key takeaway is that EPEAT embodies a lot of complexity. It addresses a lot of life cycle factors, but it's also designed, because those of us who worked in procurement know very well the pressures on category managers and procurement officials. It's designed so that the purchaser can use it extremely simply. They can simply say, I want an EPEAT Silver rating for all desktops or notebooks provided under this contract, and they can be confident that that requirement in itself, simple as it is, will touch on these use costs, end of life cycle, purchase costs, will touch on all of the environmental and cost improvements that EPEAT can deliver. Or for purchasers that are very, very involved or perhaps have a policy mandate having to do with, say, mercury reduction or recycled content inclusion, you can dig in through the EPEAT website to the detailed declaration for every product. You can look at which criteria a product meets. You can compare head-to-head. So the complexity of the system really depends on how deeply the purchaser wants to go. But it does very much enable that extremely simple integration of I want EPEAT or I want EPEAT Silver or Gold with confidence that it's a system that will address all of these life cycle impacts. So it's a great question and one that EPEAT is designed to answer.
awesome. Thank you, Sarah. I think our audience here, it's mostly category managers. They just have had a big sign of relief. Rakshana, is there something you want to add, or you can just continue?
No, I'd say that Sarah's perfectly right, but I'd also like to add that EPEAT and Green Electronics Council not only helps in guiding the purchasers from product selection, vendor evaluation, but it also enables them to leverage their brand image. It also enables them to get environmental brand recognition. And this is one of the most important benefits, and Green Electronics Council also helps in the same. So I'd say that the most important benefit amongst all would be the possibility of leveraging the brand image of the company. So what happens is that the use of EPEAT registered product automatically makes the buyer eligible for several awards and recognition programs. So to name a few, the Environmental Award from EPA, which was offered once to few Fortune 500 companies, the LEED credits, and Practice Green Health Awards. Now, apart from this, enterprises can also include their EPEAT purchasing practices and supply chain toxic declaration norms in their corporate sustainability reports. So I believe that EPEAT ultimately improves the environmental brand recognition for the company. Now, we looked at the various benefits of EPEAT. So let me proceed to explain how EPEAT can be incorporated in an IT hardware procurement cycle. So in my view, the EPEAT implementation can be divided into 3 phases, which is the framework definition, contract selection, and the service level definition phase. So the first step in the framework definition phase is to define the policies pertaining to green and to specify the EPEAT practices that are to be followed. Now the second step is to define EPEAT specifications by including the product category and the EPEAT rating by country. So I previously spoke about a conformance to 90 to 95% of the optional criteria for a gold certified EPEAT product. So the specification for the same should be done exactly in this phase. Now the second phase is the contract selection phase. So this is the phase where buyers typically reach out to vendors through RFP processes. So here the first step is to do a background evaluation on the vendor's offerings through the EPEAT registry. And once this is done, the next step will be to share the EPEAT requirements with the vendors, and along with the product configuration, the EPEAT rating and the EPEAT specification should also be shared in the RFQ. So once the vendors respond with their product offerings and the proposed energy savings, enterprises can have better visibility over the overall product portfolio and the capability of the vendors, and it enables them to compare and select the vendors. Now, this is exactly where contract clauses should also be included to address EPEAT requirements once the vendor selection is done. And finally, another important phase is the service level definition phase. So here, one of the most important steps is on the reporting metrics. So here, the requirement is that the vendor should provide quarterly reports on the IT hardware products and the estimated cost savings and the ratings by category. So what it ultimately does is that it enables category managers to have better visibility over the EPEAT portfolio in the case of a multi-vendor environment. And it also enables better reporting in corporate sustainability reports. Now the second kind of report, which is more of a variant of the reporting metrics, is to make sure that the vendors provide quarterly reports to highlight their efforts in conforming to EPEAT standards or any other green practices during the manufacturing phase, the product design, or even packaging phases. Now this brings us to the next step, which is hardware recycle and reuse program. Now this is a very important step that should be incorporated along with a service contract, and vendors should typically take care of product take back and responsible disposal management. So we looked at the sourcing best practices. Now let's look at the maturity grid for EPEAT purchasers. Alright, so a maturity grid can typically be divided into three phases. That is the laggards, the mediocre, and the best-in-class phase. Now I analyzed various parameters across each of these phases. So they are the sourcing strategy, the geography, and the industry. So the laggard phase is where purchasers have not implemented EPEAT for any of the IT hardware products. Now this could predominantly be due to any local sourcing strategy that they have adopted and due to product unavailability in a particular geography. Now for example, EPEAT registry has not expanded as of now to India, Russia, and Africa, and I'd say that these regions would typically fall under this maturity level. But looking at the planned expansion of EPEAT into India by 2014, India might well move on into the second level of maturity, which is probably the mediocre level. So we'll have to wait and watch on that. But some of the major bio industries who would come into the laggards phase are probably FMCG companies or food and beverage and manufacturing sectors. Now the mediocre level is the second level, and this is where purchasers have not implemented EPEAT for printers and thin clients and have only performed partial implementation for PCs. Now this could be due to a regional or a global strategy that they have adopted, and this could also be because EPEAT's expansion has been well established only for the PC segment, and it is rapidly growing for probably printers and thin clients in these geographies. So most of the enterprises such as pharmaceuticals, entertainment media, banking, technology, and professional services would fall under this category. Now, the topmost maturity level is the best-in-class level, and I'd say that the purchasers who are qualified for this level are currently only government purchasers, and this is mainly because of all the importance given to EPEAT purchasing in their procurement contracts. So governments typically in US and UK have the best-in-class strategy currently in place. So they have complete implementation of EPEAT for PCs, monitors, laptops, and printers as well. So probably an action pointer to move from the laggards level is to change the sourcing strategy to a more regional or a global focus and to incorporate the previously mentioned EPEAT sourcing best practices. Now, in the mediocre phase, since the implementation for PCs have already been completed, probably the best step would be to plan the forthcoming sourcing cycles for the imaging equipment sector and for the thin clients. And in the best-in-class segment, since EPEAT implementation has already been quite complete, optimization of EPEAT portfolio with best-in-class SLAs would be the next logical step. And the other aspect is to plan procurement strategy for the upcoming categories of servers and smartphones. So we looked at the implementation steps for EPEAT, but there are certain aspects that you should watch out for. So I previously mentioned that going only for an EPEAT Gold certified product might not always come out really great because there are certain constraints for the same. So Sarah, why would you say that setting the bar too high be a major concern area for enterprises, and how do they mitigate this issue?
It's a great point. I learned early on in environmental procurement, the worst environmental procurement is the one where you don't get sufficient vendors or product on offer due to setting your specifications too tightly. So one of the things that's important to understand about EPEAT is that, like all standards, it revises. Each of these product categories will revise over time. And in EPEAT's case, because it is an environmentally focused standard, that means the challenge for environmental performance will grow, will increase. So if someone has a specification which says we require EPEAT Gold products, period, that might cause problems as the standard becomes more challenging to meet in a new revision. That might mean that you can't source any products if you have a very specific, limited restriction like that. Similarly, there is a little bit of variability allowed across countries. There are 4 out of 51 criteria for PCs and displays, for example, that can be differently met in different countries. Those are things like packaging take-back and recycling, or renewable energy accessory availability. A very small group. But still, if a product in one country is registered at gold, but with only 1 point over that 75% limit, and another country doesn't include that 1 point, you might find that the same exact product with the same 40-plus environmental performance characteristics met might have a slightly different rating. So looking at the chart in the bottom, we really encourage folks to understand this cycle, that when a new standard comes out, the products will mostly be bronze registered, some silver, but a large portion bronze. At mid-stage, a year or so in, and we're seeing this already with the imaging category, products will begin to meet silver, and some products will begin to achieve gold. But as Rakshana noticed, that involves a significant effort on the part of the manufacturers, so it will be a small pool. Later on, for example, the PC display standard, which is just entering revision cycle now, will have a large portion of gold products. So given that your contract cycle may overlap any number of these phases, depending on how long your contract extends, it's important to prefer the highest rated products you can, taken together with all of your other performance needs, but also to leave yourself flexibility to accept lower rated products. You could do that 2 ways. One is to say we require EPEAT registration and prefer higher tiers. The second is to set a high, we want gold plus 90% of optional criteria, but leave yourself an out. So in future we may accept lower levels. Just important to build that flexibility in.
All right. So I'd say that the key to attain product selection, optimization of product selection, is dependent upon the EPEAT evolution stage. So whether the EPEAT stage is there in new standard or a mid stage or a later stage is what buyers should typically look into. All right. So now let's move on to the second risk. So, Sarah, what I wanted to ask here is that EPEAT declaration by products and by vendor is quite country specific. So, procurement of EPEAT products from the specified countries have been well established and it's pretty straightforward. But how do enterprises handle procurement in non-covered countries?
Yeah, it's a very important piece, particularly as demand and interest in EPEAT spreads, to understand that in non-covered countries, a number of criteria are not vetted by the EPEAT system. So there is really no such thing as EPEAT registration in a non-covered country. Now, that said, in every standard, the requirement for registration of a product is that it meet all criteria that are inherent in the product, so materials and design criteria, engineering criteria, those must be met everywhere the product is sold, whether the country is EPEAT covered or not. But there are a number of criteria in EPEAT that have to do with service provision. So those extended warranty services, those spare parts availability, the end-of-life recovery and recycling, the battery take-back, packaging recycling, a number of aspects of EPEAT registration are really done on a very local basis because they have to be. And so those service criteria are the criteria that it's very important for purchasers to address themselves in a non-covered country. And there are a couple of ways to do that. First of all, we do have a country application process, and we encourage you, if you are working in a non-covered country, to contact us, to contact me, and talk through the options for extending coverage to your country or countries where you're operating. That's a very important first step because that will solve this problem. The other, in the interim, is the strategy that you need to adopt is to ask the brand owner to provide specific proof for those service criteria that are declared in their EPEAT declaration for your country of operation. So they need to provide you with that detailed information that you can vet. So again, applying for country coverage so that you can simply say, I want EPEAT Gold, is a great strategy because it reduces the burden on the procurement officer. But in the meantime, you just want to understand that it is not acceptable for a manufacturer to claim EPEAT registration in a country where the system does not operate, and you will need to do additional due diligence in those countries.
All right, Sarah, thank you so much for providing a comprehensive understanding of the risks and the possible mitigation strategies. So we looked at the implementation roadmap and the possible risks that enterprises should typically watch out for. So let's look at who's using EPEAT at the moment. So there are several buyers for EPEAT in the Fortune 500 companies base, and I've listed few of the most important buyer segments. So let's probably take up the case of McKesson. So Sarah, you would have personally witnessed the significant benefits that McKesson was able to garner through the usage of EPEAT products. So what are the major highlights that you would like to share with attendees today?
Well, McKesson was one of the very first enterprise organizations to take up EPEAT. And they began with a specification, I believe, in 2006 even, as the system launched. And so we, for an EPA awards program later that year, we analyzed the benefits to the organization. And as you can see, this was not a huge procurement. They do obviously procure a large number of PCs and displays, but this was about 10,000 desktops and laptops. And this is benefit throughout the life cycle. Again, the calculations are always throughout the life cycle of those products. But they saved 1,300 megawatt hours of energy. They were able to reduce hazardous waste from the life cycle of those products by 11 metric tons, to reduce the toxic materials incorporated in those products by over 500 pounds, and to reduce greenhouse gas emissions related to the lifetime both use and production of those products by 100 metric tons of carbon equivalent. So very significant environmental improvement. And this was 1 year's procurement. So over the years since then, McKesson has continued to require EPEAT, and each year the crop of products that they buy, again, returns this kind of overall life cycle benefit. So very, very interesting insight into the effectiveness of the system.
Exactly. So McKesson has been a long-standing buyer of EPEAT products, right?
Yeah, absolutely, for the past 7 years.
All right. So yes, Sarah, you had mentioned about the environmental benefits, but there's also another interesting phenomenon here, and that is on the cost component. So apart from these environmental benefits, what I observed was that McKesson was also able to achieve nearly 2 to 3% of their targeted annual savings on IT hardware. So this just goes on to explain the impact on not just the environmental front, but also on the cost components. This is a very interesting case study, Sarah. Thank you so much. All right. So to sum it up, I'd say that by 2015, EPEAT will become the global comprehensive ranking system for all IT hardware products. So procurement of EPEAT products will help the organization to improve the environmental performance by nearly 60 to 65%. And of course, the other benefits are on the reduction in operational complexity, the impact on cost components, and the most important one is to elevate the brand image of the company. So the action pointer for enterprises will be to incorporate EPEAT specification in all IT hardware RFP processes moving forward, and to use this as a procurement enabler to measure vendor capability and to benchmark it as well. Thank you. Yeah. Sarah, would you like to add on to it?
I know our time is short, so I just wanted to add the fact that one of the best ways to learn more about EPEAT and take advantage of the resources that we make available to purchasers is to visit our website at epeat.net. We do provide model procurement language, policy language. We work with organizations to develop case studies, to measure your environmental benefits, gains. So there are many, many resources to support your journey towards integration of EPEAT in your IT procurement activities. And we are, that's a large part of my job. I have an associate who works on the promotion of case studies and purchaser profiles. So there is a way to help get some brand glow, as well as achieving your environmental performance indicators with the assistance of the Green Electronics Council, and we would love to be available to do that.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Again, that wraps up our presentation. This is your moderator speaking. We just finished it on time. There are a few set of basic questions, not very prominent to take this, in front of everyone. So for the benefit of our audience, our marketing team would forward these simple answers to your inbox. So nothing very concrete as of, just simple questions as to how does printer rating be affected, PC rating individually, etc. So once again, thank you all for taking your time to attend this presentation. Once again, a very special thanks to Sarah. I'm sure, Sarah, that some of the insights you offered gave a big sign of relief for our category managers. And thank you, Rakshana, for the presentation. We look forward to seeing you back again with our other set of webinars planned for next quarter. Thank you very much. You all have a nice day. Bye-bye.